welcome to our fourth in a series of virtual professional development sessions. I am Clark Michon, Executive Director of MOASSP. We are delighted to have with us Dr. Perry Hilvitz, Assistant Superintendent for Student Services in the North Kansas City Schools. Perry has been with North Kansas City Schools since 2000. I've had the pleasure of knowing Perry and working with him for 20 years. There isn't anyone more knowledgeable about what we are going to be talking about today than Perry. As a reminder, we are recording the session and will be available for those of you who have registered for this session. Good morning, Perry. Glad you are with us as we talk about important issues facing principals.
I thought I would try and put together something that hopefully made the people who are listening just uncomfortable enough to think a little more and start to think about building plans so that they were being less reactive and they were more prepared as we meet some of these novel challenges. As building administrators, we've all had to deal with disruptive student behavior and even sometimes staff behavior. Whether it was dress code, inappropriate language, fighting, or even drugs and alcohol, we generally know what to do to maintain a productive and safe working environment. When I first started in the 80s and 90s, we didn't have to deal with cell phones, cameras, or the internet, let alone social media. Over time, our society has changed, and we've had to rethink how we would deal with our newest challenges, and the lines that seemed so well defined at one time are now somewhat blurred. In this session, I will talk about some of these issues and the challenges they will present to us in this very unusual school year. I'd like for the format to be as interactive as possible. My hope is that you'll learn more from each other than you will from me, so don't hesitate to ask questions or add commentary through your mic. And I think Clark might also be monitoring the chat function, but I'd just soon you pop right on and ask whatever questions you had. We'll begin with defining some terminology. This is critical since we often say the same word, but we use it to express different meanings. Let's start off with simple and move towards the more complex. We're going to start with compliance. What is compliance in education? Well, compliance is simply the application of accountability to a set of rules, procedures, or policies. As a building administrator, part of your job is to establish rules, publish and teach those rules, and enforce the compliance of those rules. If you are from a small community with little transiency, this is a lot easier than if you are constantly getting new students throughout the year. In a little bit, we'll talk about the interplay between establishing rules and their relationship with diverse cultural norms. But for now, let's focus on compliance. In many schools, the handing out of a handbook or the posting of a link to a handbook that contains policies, procedures, and rules is the beginning, middle, and end of the training for staff and students on appropriate behaviors. The notion is that by publishing these, it is now the responsibility of the staff and students to read and understand and follow them. I wish that worked, but unfortunately, this will ultimately result in more work for you on the back end and leave you legally vulnerable. I know you don't have time to go through all of the policies and rules with your students and staff, but I've made a list here of some that absolutely should be a part of your return to school or your return to work. I'm going to start with staff. With staff, you want to make sure you are absolutely hitting these: discrimination and harassment policy, including the new Title IX guidelines, technology and social media policy and guidance, student staff relations policy. In particular, you want to make sure you're touching on the consequences of or not being alone with the student, giving students rides, giving students gifts, communicating with students in private, whether that's in person or electronically, their mandated reporter obligations, bullying reporting, and dress code, including the display of text on pins, hats, and other outerwear. Now that's for staff. For students, dress code, technology, social media usage, student-staff relations, weapons, drugs, and alcohol, fighting, and bullying. Those are the ones you really need to make sure you've touched before you get started. Any thoughts or questions before I continue? Okay. There will be other policies that your folks who advise you on legal issues will suggest that you cover as well. But these are the ones you need to make sure you hit right off the bat.
Hey, Perry, just a real quick comment. Yesterday we had Ed Council presented to those, our principals, online virtual meeting, and to do that, he said, don't do it. He said,
Yeah.
principals, you need to stay with that board policy. That will protect you. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, it absolutely will. So here's why Dwayne says that. Anytime you get challenged, and that challenge goes to anybody who works on the legal side, the first question they're going to ask is, did you follow your own board's policy? So the way it works in the courts is you have to first show administratively you haven't made any mistakes. And by the way, it's that way in all sorts of legal venues. Even when you get a speeding ticket, if the police officer doesn't fill out the paperwork properly, you can have that dismissed on administrative grounds. Well, it's the same thing with us. The first thing any good lawyer is going to do is go back and see, did you do everything it said in your policy? And you're going to notice if you go through your policies, and I don't know if Dwayne gave you a page, but I know MSBA comes out with one every year you can go look at. And it's a list of all the policies, their policies, MSBA's, where inside the policy itself, it says that you have trained students or staff. And oftentimes, we've got so many other things to cover, and we need to talk about masks, and we need to talk about social distancing and those kinds of things. It's easy to cut out some of the things that have been very repetitive and that we think, oh, everybody already knows that. If you haven't documented that you've trained your staff on the policies that say within the policies you've trained them, or if you don't train kids on the things, whether it's going to be this year, you got to make sure you've covered suicide prevention. This year, you're going to have to cover, I think it's sexual abuse and neglect. AC says that we have gone over this policy with our staff. If you don't do that and there's a violation, you're going to end up losing if challenged in court. So he's absolutely right. That is absolutely crucial.
Hey, Perry, can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
So in your area, or in particularly in North Kansas City, how do your principals actually do that? Do they do it as part of their back to school big, I'm assuming they have a big back to school faculty meeting, or do they set this aside as a separate, like an hour meeting that's separate from the back to school stuff? Practically, how do they do that?
So we have three ways that we deal with that. The first is that we send them out a list of things that they have to cover in their back to school meetings with staff prior to students showing up. And they're required, after they cover those items, to write the date that it was covered, send me an agenda, and send me a list of the staff that were there. The second thing we do is I create something called a policy module where staff are all required to get online, review the policies, check that they've reviewed those policies, and acknowledge that they don't have any questions and that they understand them. If you use Talent Ed as one of the tools for hiring and advertising positions, there's a function in there that allows you to do that through that. I know that groups like music, they have their own sets of videos that they use for those. But yeah, we make sure we get that documented. The third thing we do is myself and our in-house legal counsel do 3 video sessions that the faculty have to watch after school one day. First one will be in September, second one will be in October, third one will be in November, where we go through and update and cover additional policies and practices that we need to make sure we're following, because otherwise we end up with a problem. The other thing we do is we actually, for the policy related to student staff conduct, we show a video to the kids while the children are sitting in their homeroom class. Every teacher has to show this video, and we also send a link to the video home to the parents explaining what to do if you feel uncomfortable in interacting with a staff member. And that's been very helpful as well.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So I'm going to piggyback on that. You talk about the video that you just mentioned. Is that something that is district created, or is it something that feel like we're using all of our back to school training videos online?
This is something that I created. I do most of my own stuff, so I don't trust necessarily other things that are out there, and it doesn't have to be particularly entertaining, but it has to make sure it covers the policy. So in my student staff relations, we are an MSBA district. I actually read the policy, and I've got some animation that goes on that sort of mimics what I'm reading while they're watching it. The problem with summarizing things or grabbing something off, you got to make sure, does this actually mirror the policy that I'm using? And so that's why I'd rather it be a little dry, but make sure if I get asked in court, I can absolutely say with 100% confidence, yes, we've covered this policy explicitly with parents, with kids, and with staff members.
Thanks.
Sure. All right. So now we've reviewed the rules and policies. Let's talk about enforcement. So when enforcing rules, the first key is consistency. The consistent application of consequences and communication with staff, parents, and students is crucial. It's not just for you as the building leader, but it's for your staff and their daily interactions with kids and parents. Inconsistent application of rules or policies will be the first strategy for those that are accused to use against you. This is why documentation of communication and investigations and actions taken is so very important. All right, we're going to jump to free speech and expression in schools. And I don't want to talk specifically about political things at this point, but more in general, especially with a contentious election that's coming up in November. I thought that this might be a good place to go next. So when we're talking about staff, have you had any issues related to staff posting messages on social media that have upset parents, students, or other staff?
Not yet.
I can tell you, it's statistically, it's just a matter of time. I have dealt with this more often than I would like.
We have.
Yes, sir.
We have at the high school, so Monica's lucky.
Well,
Sorry.
here is an example of a principal who posted something on Twitter that ended up on the news and brought a lot of attention to his school district. So let's see if I can. I had my mouse there a second ago.
A Metro school district is investigating a controversial tweet posted by a principal. The principal is now on paid leave this morning. Leslie Aguilar joins us with the details. So, Leslie, what exactly was this tweet, and why are so many people upset about it?
Gina, the tweet was a reply to a gun control advocate, and parents contacted KCTV5 saying that the principal was trolling the activist and making light of a very serious issue. David Hogg tweeted support for research on gun violence, urging people to contact their congressman and ask them to support funding. He's one of the survivors of the mass shooting at Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida last year. 17 of his classmates were killed. A school principal with the Platte County School District replied to Hogg's tweet with pictures of himself and his children holding guns. The text of the tweet simply said, #America. It's a personal Twitter account. The tweet was posted Tuesday and it was brought to the district's attention on Wednesday. The district says posts from employee personal social media accounts do not reflect the views or opinions of the district. They say they are investigating the situation, and they understand why the public response has been strong with regard to student safety in our nation's schools. They intend to address the situation immediately in a strong manner consistent with the Board of Education policies, as well as their goal of ensuring a safe and caring environment for students, staff, and the community. Now, the district did not name the principal, and his Twitter account has since been deleted. We're working to contact the district and the principal about this story. Leslie Aguilar, KCTV5 News.
All right, Leslie, thank you. A metro school.
Okay, so I don't know if you're familiar with this and what ended up transpiring because of it, but this was an elementary principal. And it's not as though he was commenting on anything that had occurred in his community locally, but instead on the comments made by one of those kids from Parkland. So let's deconstruct this a little bit. Do you think, or do you believe that the principal had the legal right to make this post? Any thoughts? Okay.
Well,
Do
you're kind of putting us on the spot. I'll just say yes, just to start the argument off.
There you go. You're absolutely correct. He had the legal right to make this post. The next question I think you need to ask when something like this happens is, do you believe that his post was in violation of your district's board policy? And I don't know, everybody's, unless you are on a policy service, and even then, tailor our policies individually for our district. If you don't know the answer to that question, that's one you're going to want to know the answer to. Does your district have a policy about comments that staff make on social media?
Well, Perry, the thing I would just chime in, and I've always said this to my staff everywhere. We live in a glass house, and there's expectations for this position, expectations for educators that they're high expectations. And so that seemed to serve us well through the years. We live in a glass house.
Absolutely. So imagine this is one of your staff and this happened. What are the steps you're going to take immediately? What's the first thing you do? Are you going to ask the staff to delete the post? Are you going to suspend the staff while you investigate it? Are you going to call the superintendent? What are you going to say to parents who are upset and offended regarding the content of the tweet? What are you going to say to the parents who call in support of the principal and say, damn right, nothing wrong with that. You should be able to do that. Would you defend the staff's right to free speech, knowing that this restricting him from making that comment would be considered a violation of free speech? So that's a lot of questions, and it's a lot of things to think about, but it's very likely that you may run into a scenario like this. And it's really important that you have an idea of where you're going to go and what you're going to do. The key here is, if you've got a map, if you have constructed a map for yourself to follow, then you're much less likely to run into making a decision and wondering, was that the right decision? Because you've already got your map to say, when this happens, this is what I would do next. I will tell you that in this particular district, what ended up transpiring was they ended up reaching a settlement with this individual, and it was a very expensive settlement for the district because it was not a large district. And in normal times, we've got some money put away to handle and deal with this stuff, but in times like we're living in now, I don't know that we have the money to settle with folks like that. So have a plan. Okay, here's some things that you may have to deal with in regarding students and parents. So I've got a series of these I'm going to throw out. If you want to jump in and talk about it, we can. Again, I know there's only a couple in. I don't want to put you on the spot too much, but even just to discuss what you might do. So scenario number one is a student comes to you and says that he doesn't feel safe because one of his classmates is wearing a t-shirt that says MAGA on it. How do you reply to that student? I don't feel safe. Okay.
Well, I'll jump in here. I'm probably going to talk with that student a little more, find out what it is that makes them feel unsafe, and try to maybe just have a conversation about that first.
Let's say that in this case, the student is a member of the LGBTQ community, or this student is someone of Mexican descent, and that it's followed by chants of build the wall from the other students. Just something to think about. A parent calls you and tells you that a teacher in your building has posted on Facebook that they support Black Lives Matter, and they want you to assure them that that teacher is not saying or doing anything in their classroom that supports Black Lives Matter, since it is a political organization. How are you going to reply to that parent? I'm going to throw another one at you. A parent wants you to ban students from wearing shirts that say defund the police, since her husband is a police officer, and this is so upsetting to her daughter that she says her daughter can't focus on schoolwork. So this is the type of scenario that potentially leads, at least with us, to then hearing from attorneys who say, if you can't provide a safe environment for this student where she can come and do her work without feeling fearful or denigrated, that we're going to enroll her in private school, and we're going to send the tuition bill to you. And we're going to get to that, but I'll tell you when I get to the end of this, one of the things you can do, speech and writing on clothes and things like that, there's a way to regulate it, but unfortunately it has to be regulated based on the clothing item themselves versus the speech. And I'll talk about that here in a second. Student comes to class, comes to school and refuses to wear their mask. And they say, I won't wear my mask because of religious reasons. Are you gonna let the student not wear the mask? Do they have the right to do that? What if they say they're not gonna wear the mask for political reasons? They believe this is all just politics. What if they refuse to wear their mask because of medical reasons, but they say that they can't get a doctor's note because it costs too much? What is your mask policy? So do you guys know, do you have a policy that regulates mask wearing? Or do you have a return to school guide that you wrote that regulates mask wearing?
We do. We're requiring all students and staff to wear masks where social distancing can occur.
Are you providing them with the masks?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Are you allowing them to wear masks from home if they want to?
Yes.
If a child is wearing their mask improperly, are they getting sent home?
No, we're going to educate that child before we do anything. If it becomes a potential problem, then we'll work with the parents and go from there, is what we've been instructed to do. But we're going to do a lot of educating as to what and why and those types of things.
I think that's very smart. If you make it just about the mask itself and you're going to discipline a student because of that, you better go and amend your discipline guide and your discipline policy to include that, because you can't just make up new things and provide disciplinary consequences and not potentially lose if challenged. So A, you're either going to have to include that in your disciplinary policy section as one of the categories, or do what you're doing, which is B, saying this isn't about the mask. This is about non-compliance. This is about being unsafe. This is about being disrespectful, because you probably do have policies and procedures that cover those areas, and that will leave you much more protected through that.
We do. One thing we're also going to talk to kids about is mask, without those, let's go back to your mega message and the Black Lives Matter, we're going to put them in a dress code as well. Just so we've talked about those scenarios and how we would deal with those in our admin meeting a little bit.
So tell me what your thought is. So a student comes in and he's got a mask and it says BLM.
Right. That's going to happen. I have no doubt. Again, just like Jim said, we're going to talk to those kids and we're going to offer them an alternative, and we're going to see how much of a substantial disruption it causes, because the minute a complaint comes in, but we're also going to educate and ask why the student is wearing it. At my level, I have 7th and 8th graders. Jim has 9 through 12. I think for a lot of us, it comes into a little bit of shock value, or because mom and dad said to. So we'll include not only the education of the kid, but we'll talk to the parent as well in dealing with those situations before it becomes a real big issue, and offer the alternatives of those types of things. We deal with this a lot, not just with masks, but with the rainbow flag and kids holding it offensive, and how we deal with it, and that, and upwards of the Confederate flag already. I just don't see that masking is going to be any different, and how we've handled those situations in the past has been successful. I think we will continue to do the same thing as we move forward.
So one of the things that school districts do sometimes to help themselves through that process is to ban certain clothing items, for instance, hats, unless there's a religious exemption. But the other thing you can do, and not worry about somebody saying you're trying to stifle someone's free speech rights, is to just say there's no text allowed on any of the garments that kids are wearing, or that staff are wearing, or pins, or whatever accessories. If you blanket say we're not doing that the courts have said that's not a suppression of First Amendment rights, because you are not attacking political speech in that sense. You are specifically making rules related to dress code. I think you're going to find masks with pictures or statements on it, and it's definitely going to be a process. So I touched on this already, but there are a few things that can help you build a plan that you're comfortable with following when any or all of these things that happen. And I feel like the first thing you need to do is make sure you are familiar with or know the law. When we make decisions or we make decision maps, we need to make sure that those maps are following what's in state statute and what the courts have said, so that we don't get bit by a potential lawsuit. So a lot of this here, and I'm sure that this y'all are familiar with Tinker and Hazelwood and all that stuff, but a lot of people haven't probably looked at that for a few years anyway, since grad school. So I'm going to show a little film that reminds us a little bit of where that lies legally.
In 1969, the Supreme Court ruled that a public school forbidding students from wearing black armbands to protest the Vietnam War was a violation of the First Amendment rights.
So how does a seemingly subtle act of protest make a momentous decision? And on what basis was the police attack?
Take the break off and then
In 1965, Americans were divided in their support of the Vietnam War, with protests sprouting nationwide.
In Des Moines, Iowa, a group of students led by 15-year-old John Tinker, his sister Mary Beth, and their friend Christopher Eckert quietly carried out their own act of protest by wearing black armbands to school.
The school district prohibited the armbands, threatening suspension or expulsion if the students didn't comply. The Tinker family, active in civil rights and anti-war movements, were committed to protecting free speech and took the school district to court.
After the district court ruled against the Tinkers, the case was brought to the United States Court of Appeals, which resulted in a tie. The Tinker family would make one final appeal in 1968 to the Supreme Court.
With the lower level courts divided, how would our highest court come to a decision, and what would it mean for the Tinker family and other American students?
Attorney Dan Johnston took on the case for Tinker, arguing that the school district's armband policy was unconstitutional and violated the students' First Amendment rights.
He also maintained that since students have been granted constitutional protection of the right to symbolic expression in schools in the 1943 case of West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett, the same reasoning should apply to the students' use of their armbands.
Opposition to the case was firm, arguing that the students' decision to wear the armbands was a disruption to the school's duty to maintain order, so much so that it outweighed their First Amendment rights.
The interpretation of the Constitution had been debated and a major decision was underway. Do First Amendment rights disappear when a student enters a public school?
According to the Supreme Court, that answer is no. The 7-2 count came with Justice Abe Fortas writing for the majority.
Fortas wrote that teachers and students, quote, do not shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate.
Fortas further argued that student expression cannot be suppressed when it doesn't interfere with school discipline.
The dissent maintained that the Tinkers' behavior was a disruption, a sentiment echoed in future cases.
In 1986, the Supreme Court ruled that a student could be legally suspended for lewd speech. And in 1988, the court decided that it was within a school's power to censor student newspapers.
Turbulent political times often inspire protests, especially among passionate young people.
What will next test the limits of free speech and result in a Supreme Court controversy? This was the story of Tinker versus Des Moines.
All right, everybody, I know you found that video helpful.
Sorry about that. So anyway, knowing the law is super important, and understanding First Amendment rights of students and their right to freedom of speech and freedom of expression is important. The second thing that you really need to know is your own district's policies. The courts have been very critical of, especially of late, of policies that are vague in defining terms, especially regarding dress code. The other thing the courts have done is they've essentially said to districts, you can't make up new rules as far as enforcement goes. If it's not listed as something that relates to if you do this, then this is the consequence, then we're not going to uphold your right to do that. They have to, the students and parents have to be told ahead of time what the rules are and what the consequences of those rules are. The third thing you need to know is you need to know your boss's sensibilities. If you haven't sat down with your boss and run through some of these scenarios, you need to do that before things happen. You don't want to discover, oh, my boss wanted me to do this when this happened and not what I did in the moment. I think that that's extremely important. I'd even add to know enough about your community to understand your community's sensibilities so that you knew when you were going to be in trouble if you went too far afield in one direction or another. The other thing is you need to also know when to pass these things on to either your boss or your communications department if you have one. But most of all, you really just need to have a plan. So let's talk a little bit about hate speech, because we were talking about free speech. There is no legal definition of hate speech under US law. Just like there's no legal definition of evil ideas, rudeness, or unpatriotic speech, or any other kind of speech that people might condemn. Generally, however, hate speech is any form of expression through which speakers intend to vilify, humiliate, or incite hatred against groups or a class of persons on the basis of race, religion, skin color, sexual identity, gender identity, ethnicity, disability, or national origin. And the reason I mention those is because those are all of the subgroups or categories that are going to be mentioned in federal law, which is why your discrimination and harassment policy specifically speaks to discrimination and harassment based on one of those specifically identified groups. In the United States, hate speech is protected by the First Amendment. Courts extend this protection on the grounds that the First Amendment requires the government to strictly protect robust debate on matters of public concern, even when that debate devolves into distasteful, offensive, or even hateful speech that causes others to feel grief, anger, or fear. The Supreme Court's decision in Snyder versus Phelps provides an example of this legal reasoning. Under the current First Amendment jurisprudence, hate speech can only be criminalized when it directly incites imminent criminal activity or consists of specific threats of violence targeted against a person or a group. So I say that from a legal standpoint, but from a practical standpoint in a school, it's not just a matter of is it against the law or is it illegal for a student to do this. It's instead this fight between what's the legal right of the student versus what's your right as a school administrator to control that environment and make sure that it's not substantially, as Clark said, or materially disrupted by that behavior. When it comes to kids and even staff members and their right to the First Amendment, you better make sure that you have real documentation and specific examples of how that disruption occurred, and have a sense of what type of disruption that was. Was it one parent who called and complained? And is that really substantial disruption? I've seen the argument try to be made by schools in court or districts in court that that's a substantial disruption because then that principal couldn't go do other things that they had planned to do that day. The courts have generally not agreed with that notion of substantial disruption. Okay, students and their First Amendment rights. So students have the right to speak out, hand out flyers and petitions, and wear expressive clothing in school as long as they don't disrupt the functioning of the school or violate the school's policies that don't hinge on the message expressed. So again, your policy can't ban the message, it can only ban the disruption. What counts as disruption will vary by context, but a school disagreeing with a student's position on thinking their speech is controversial or in bad taste is not enough to qualify. Courts have upheld students' rights to wear things like anti-war armbands or an armband opposing the right to get an abortion, a shirt supporting the LGBT community. Schools can have rules that have nothing to do with the message expressed, like dress code. So for example, schools can, and we talked about this a minute ago, schools can prohibit students from wearing hats because that rule is not based on what the hat may say, but it can't prohibit you from wearing only pro-NRA hats. Outside of school, students enjoy essentially the same rights to protest and speak out as anyone else. This means that they are likely to be most protected if they organize, protest, and advocate their own views off campus or outside of school hours. And this includes posting on social media. They have the right to speak their mind on social media and to use your school cannot punish them for the content they post off campus or outside of school hours that does not relate to school. So I'm going to kind of go a different direction as to what do you do after a kid posts something that causes a fuss or that makes people upset. And I kind of want to go a little bit of a different direction. What we have found is that we can chase and punish and suspend all day long. And it only seems to add a little bit of fuel and in some ways, not necessarily vilify the kids, but oftentimes vilify the adults and make this type of behavior exciting for kids and making them sort of locally infamous. Although generally parents are pretty good with backing us, the other kids see these kids causing chaos and exerting control and power that they didn't know they had. And that seems kind of sexy in some ways. So what we've done instead is we have tried to focus on making sure that students understood the damage that happens oftentimes when these things occur. So some of my thoughts that I wanted to talk about related to this are thinking about ways that exist in your school that allow for productive dialogues related to what is going on in the outside world. Are there safe places for students to express their knowledge, thoughts, and opinions respectfully? So we focus a lot on restorative circles, and I will tell you that we have had a tremendous amount of success in getting kids to start to see each other as empathetic figures, and stop looking at each other like two-dimensional cartoons, right? You're not just the football player, or you're not just this kid who dresses this way or drives this car or whatever I'm seeing on the outside. But because we participate in these classroom circles, and I get to hear the thoughts and the feelings and some of the vulnerabilities of each other, that I get to see you as a person, and I do develop a sense of empathy, and I'm less likely to be mean or bully or hurtful to you. And that's been very helpful to us. The other group that sometimes we've been so focused on achievement that we haven't taken the time to sit and listen to and actually give a voice, allow them to feel like they've had a voice, is a number of parents in our community. So my next question to you is, do you invite parents and community members to express their thoughts and opinions in ways that leave them feeling respected and a part of the system? I know this is a difficult challenge. I am sure that there are a lot of the schools out there that say, hey, we invite parents to PTA meetings, they just don't show up. I think that if, and this is coming from the compliance officer who listens to all the angry complaints, right? If I feel disconnected as a parent from my school, then when I get mad, I sit and stew. I don't really necessarily feel like I've got an avenue or that I'll be listened to because I don't feel connected necessarily to the school. And so when it finally does come out, it's just this seething anger and rage, and how dare you, and you never listen to us, and you're mean to kids, and that kind of stuff. And I get a fair amount of those complaints, given that we have 21,000 kids. What we're doing, again, to prevent it, instead of, okay, what's the smartest way to deal with something when it blows up? How do we keep it from blowing up in the first place? Is we're going out and we are literally going to drag parents in, or we're going to go out to where they are at, that don't traditionally come and work with us as a part of what we're doing in our schools. And this isn't so much a focus on academics. We're theming it out, and our first theme has to do with civil unrest in society, and what are the things that we do as a school to help make kids feel safe and comfortable and respected. And if I invite parents to come into my building to have these conversations and they don't show up, then we're going to go out to the places that they congregate at. We will go to the churches, we will go to the community centers, we will go to the VFW hall, and the truth is, at least with us in the suburbs, there seem to be fewer and fewer of those places. So we are spending more time calling parents up and inviting them in before for instance, before they go into work, to come in and have coffee and a donut so we can talk to them about their kids' school, and not their kids' work, not their kids' grades, but the school environment. And is this a healthy place for them? And if not, what do they think we can do better to make this a healthier place for them?
Hey, Perry, I'm sure you have protocols in place to make sure that those go well. Are they consistent? You have 30 some plus buildings in North Kansas City. Do you try to have similar protocols from building to building?
We do. So what we did was we've invested. So we used something that we created a long time ago called a diversity council, but this isn't necessarily just a race thing, right? So although sometimes it is. What we did was through the diversity councils, we started training staff members. And the training that we've used is a combination of some homegrown stuff, but it's also, there's a group out there called IIRP that we send out to have people trained with. We also work with another group called NCC that we train with. And then there's another group called, and I'll have to grab the book in a minute, but I can't remember the name of the press. And that's just a matter of age, but I'll grab it in a minute. And we use their materials to practice. I would never put an administrator, regardless of who they were and how talented they thought they were, in a position to deal with angry parents without having practiced working with these people and specifically, as you said, the protocols as to how does this go? What do you do when somebody says this, when somebody says that? The other is when we bring them in, we talk to them about how we want this interaction to be. So it's not a free for all. We have a specific agenda. We're going to deal with specific items. If they want to add more items to the agenda, that's great. If they need information, it's interesting, Clark. A lot of what we discovered in our first round is that we do tons of stuff that the parents didn't even know about. So when we said, what's your wish list of things we want you to do with their kids? They gave us a list of things we already do. And what we found out right off the bat was, hey, what we don't do well is market all the great things that we do. So that was an eye opener for us. And I thought it helped. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to touch on, because I know I'm coming to the end, is this. So there are certainly some things that you can do to help yourself through difficult times and struggles. But there are also some things you can do just to make things more difficult for yourself. So I'm going to play this clip and then just chat about it real quick.
An Illinois school district has a dress code for students who are doing online learning, but there's one rule that's upsetting some parents. In Springfield, kids are not allowed to wear pajamas while doing classes online at home. When asked how the dress code might be enforced, the school district issued this statement. The policy will be addressed on an individual basis through the restorative discipline options for classroom managed behavior as outlined in the handbook. Generally speaking, there are no definitive one-to-one consequences outlined in our handbook for any disciplinary reason. Incidents of misconduct and subsequent consequences are treated on an individual basis.
Okay, so here's the thing. How many mistakes did they make through that? Their policy specifically said, if you are working online, and this wasn't even in a Teams setting, you're not to wear pajamas and you can't be in your bedroom. Really? You're gonna try and enforce that? I found it amusing. I had an administrator. I'm not going to say it's from our district, but it's possible. Who called me the other day and said, "Hey, if we're going to go 50% with our kids, where kids just go Monday and Tuesday, and we suspend them for 10 days, does that mean they're out for 5 weeks?" It's those kinds of things that I think to myself. Well, the first question you got to ask yourself is, really? Is that important and necessary? So we do a lot of things at times to step on our own feet and get in our own ways. And I just thought that was a reminder of, I guess your first rule is let's make sure that if we end up in the news, we don't look silly, and then we'll follow the rest of the rules from there. That's what I have for today for you. We're down to about 5 minutes left. So if you have any questions or thoughts you want to throw out, I'm happy to chat about it.
Hey, Perry, can I just go back to your previous slide? When, you guys are a little different in Kansas City because you're such a large district. You come to Rolla or lots of other outlying districts. I find myself, and you can't help it, but I talk school with people at Walmart. I talk school with people at the gas station. And I have found, especially at the high school level, when parents really don't want to be involved and kids don't want their parents to be involved, I've found that to be a real helpful opportunity to help kind of stave off some of those things. I don't know how you do it in a bigger district when maybe you're not as, you can live somewhere and it's just there's so many people. But one of the things I felt like has been a real help for us is just, again, talking with those people in the grocery store or wherever, just to help kind of calm some of those fears or concerns. I don't know, it's not really a question, but I found what you said interesting, and I thought it kind of wraps into what we try to do here.
Yeah, so like I said, when you don't have much transiency, your kids generally, you've got the same kids year after year after year. They've heard the rules, they know the rules. It's a fairly different game than when you've got a constant flow of different people. The other thing we run into in suburban districts is that we have communities. We have for instance, right now we have a Burmese community where a majority of the folks don't even speak English, and so that's a particular challenge. We have people who are coming and being resettled from places like Syria, where the last thing they would do is trust the government because of some of the places that they came from. So it's definitely a unique challenge for us. For small communities, and I've been in, 4,000 is about the smallest district I've been in, but it was very different. And as you said, I knew where to go to get to those folks. And one of the things that we did in those communities, and in particular when I was in Turner, which is on the Kansas side, we went through a time where we had a lot of people lose their jobs. We had, I think, the Owens Corning folks closed down and the railroads laid a bunch of the welders off. And we had a fairly steep rise. And I don't know if you're going to see this in your communities as well, if you do have high unemployment, but we had a significant rise in alcohol and drug issues amongst parents and physical abuse and stuff like that. And so one of the things we did was we spent more time at that point inviting families in, feeding them, doing sessions on things like love and logic, doing I think one year we even brought in folks to help them do tax preparation, just for no other reason but to say, hey, we're not we know that we're an important part of this community, and we are here to help you. We're here to hold your hands in tough times, to pray with you, to do what we need to as a community to help bring us along. No, I know once you get into junior high school and high school, those back to school nights look very different than when the parents rush in elementary, and they're all still very excited to be a part of that. It's a struggle, that's for sure.
Well, principals have to create structures and systems to invite parents in. We always told our staff we want to move from rules to relationships with kids. Same applies to parents. You want to move from rules to relationships with your parents. I think it's, now for us, we live 5 minutes from our school that we were principal. We shopped in the same vicinity. We worshiped. We went to restaurants. And so we did have relationships with many of our families. and that bodes well during tough times.
It really does. And I will tell you, and he probably doesn't want me saying this, but one of the things that Clark, one of the many things he did very, very successfully was to develop those relationships. Clark was seen as very much a leader in the community. And the fact of the matter is, he had quite a bit more leverage when he needed it, because the people in the community didn't just see him coming in and doing a job. They knew he loved the kids. They knew he loved the community, and they loved him back. And so that's. I know it doesn't say anything in your contracts about that, but and I know it's not always fun to stop and have those conversations in the Walmart parking lot. But man, can they really pay dividends when things get tough. Thank you very much for listening to this session, and I hope in some small way it at least made you think a little bit, and I hope you have a really good and productive school year. Clark, I'll toss it back to you.
Thank you, Perry. Any final comments from those on the line?
I'd just like to say thank you, Perry, for all of these additional thoughts that I rub, as we're going through. I think a lot of it is very relevant to what we deal with on a daily basis, and made me think, and I took some really good notes as I go through that I'll add to my to-do list this weekend about creating a screencast for kids and those types of things. So I've been too caught up in the COVID to go back and really think about all of the other things that I have to do, but I'm going to do that this weekend, so thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Barry. It's really helpful.
Once again, thank you, Perry. You did a fantastic job in North Kansas City Schools. A reminder that our next virtual event is September 9th, Growing Advanced Placement for Administrators. We will have Mark Parson from the College Board with us then. We hope you can join us. All the best to everyone as you begin the school year, and take care.